Starting this Friday on Real News Radio, we expand our programming to include a new show, The Veteran Next Door. Quality edutainment like you've never heard it before. Stories of real veterans, told by the veterans themselves, and hosted by Knoxville resident Randy Baxter. Tune in this Friday at 12 p.m. for The Veteran Next Door on Real News Radio, broadcasting from realnewsradio.com.
Not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena.
You know what, I've heard people call, and I kind of like the era that we're in, the post-truth kind of era.
And lately there's been a lot of coverage in the real news about the growing and booming business of creating fake news.
Well, I don't know, maybe he was watching CNN fake news. What do you think?
You are fake news. Sir, go ahead.
Let us return to the fight. This battle is far from over.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another edition of Real News in the Morning. This community we're building, it's strong, it's thriving, we're growing every single day. The numbers are increasing. We're having awesome conversations with people both during this time, after this time, on screen, off screen, in the real world, not in the real world, whatever you want to say. It is 9:04 in the morning on June 18th. This is a Thursday, and I'm so happy to be here with y'all. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. Like, I've been having some good conversations the last couple days. I think a lot of people are in maybe entering a weird point of depression and certainly entering into a weird point of frustration. But I don't know. I really am hearing a lot of good conversation taking place, a lot of growth happening. And man, I don't know, when you push yourself to the edges of those extremes to really figure out what you believe, it's a very enlightening time to live in. I'll say that much, right? When else in your lifetime have you been able to really push yourself and think like, all right, man, circumstances being what they are, what do I actually believe about something? Hey, Shine buddy, speaking of what is truth, I know this is true. My buddy Shine over there, how you doing this morning, man? What's going on your end?
I feel great. I'm doing a radio show
yeah.
on YouTube and Facebook and stuff. That's what I'm doing. What are you doing, Grant?
Same deal, man. Same difference.
Oh yeah, but like as Grant always says, and it's totally true. Like we love you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Another exciting day planned. We're gonna try to keep the stream from going offline.
Yeah.
We're gonna try to keep it all wholesome and lovely here in the first 15, 20 minutes or so, and then that'll hopefully keep everything kosher.
Sorry.
Am I allowed to say kosher too?
Yeah,
okay?
I think so.
All right, cool. But hey, good morning, everybody. We got a great show planned. It's gonna be great.
Go. Hey, shout out to everybody in Facebook right now. By the way, realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live. That's sort of the central page, landing page hub for all the stuff. You'll find YouTube links, Mixer links, Facebook links, all the stuff that we have. I think our Twitter's on there and a bunch of other stuff as well. I don't know half the stuff that Sean does in the back end to make sure all these people out here know what's going on. But what's up, Kelly, Judy, Cody, Josh, David Clary's in there again, Daniel, all the folks that join us on Facebook that I'm seeing right now. That's what I'm doing with my eyes, by the way, when I'm looking over here. Greatest audience in the nation appreciation segment. That's this quick segment here where we break down what you're thankful for, what you need help with, what you need encouragement for, some prayer concerns. You want us to pray for you about something. That's one thing we do here, by the way. Just be ready for that. Any businesses that are trying to innovate, stay alive during this time. What's been going on your end, stuff like that, anything like that. Bring it to our attention. Send it our way, direct message. The Real News or myself or David Shine Thompson, either one doesn't necessarily matter. We'll make sure that happens for you. I got two things here in the Greatest Audience in the Nation appreciation segment. Quick one is a quick little, just a quick little self-brag for myself, I guess. I'm sitting here over here working with a brand new computer Man, and I got to have a big shout out and a big thanks to a few people, Jonathan, Daniel, and Zach in particular. Zach usually listens over there on the either Mixer side, Twitch side, or the YouTube side. These three guys, though, man, a couple months back when the shutdown started, I said to myself, like, I'm doing it, man. I'm just going to build myself a PC. We're doing the YouTube stuff, maybe some video editing in the future. I'm going to try and figure this thing out. I have no clue what I'm doing, though. So I got to reach out to my buddies using the Real News community. It's a real life story. Reached out to these guys, used PCPartPicker.com, sent them the whole the whole mock-up with the thing. Is this look right? Should I change this here? We went back and forth, tweaked a few things. They helped me through the build, and it's working, man. It's legit. Out to literally everybody. The first story here coming from Americans for Prosperity itself.org. By we, I mean myself, David Sean Thompson, our buddy Josh, both the deputy director and state director here. We worked for quite a while on this thing called a drug-free school zone bill. And sorry, Sean, I was getting a little bit distracted. Seems like the Facebook was cutting out, so let me know if we're still good on that end.
It did.
Okay.
But we might be back.
Okay. So the second portion here, I want to say Greatest Odds in the Nation appreciation segment. That drug-free school zone bill that we've been working on for such a long time, that passed both houses yesterday. The only point now that it has to go to is to the Governor Lee himself, Governor Lee's desk, to sign off on this thing. And I say this is Greatest Audience of the Nation appreciation segment because I don't think, Sean, tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think members of the audience here in Real News know how important not only that bill is, but how much work they did to help us make moves on this bill. I'm talking like behind the scenes stuff for behind the scenes stuff that we had to get this bill moving. This bill in particular, again, if you just joined us back with the bill I'm talking about, the bill in particular is SB 2734. That's Senate Bill 2734. This bill passed both houses, both chambers yesterday, that is. It just goes to Governor Lee's desk. Now, this is the bill in particular that would reform the state's drug-free zones and reduce them from 1,000 feet to 500 feet and give judges massive amounts of discretion. Now, here's why that's important, okay? Currently, under Tennessee law, there's a mandatory minimum sentence if you're caught with any amount of drugs within a drug-free zone. Now, the original intention of this bill, obviously, was to make it so that drug dealers don't sell drugs to kids. It's exactly, who would want that? What ended up happening, however, is that a lot of people end up caught up in this that had nothing to do with the original intention of the bill. We told this story one time before about a judge coming in and giving testimony and saying something to the effect of like, hey, we got this guy who was 972 feet in his home, in his own personal residence, 972 feet within a drug-free zone. He had a small pinky fingernail size worth of cocaine on his person. We had to charge him with it because the statute dictates that we have no choice here. We had to give this kid, who was a 22-year-old kid, a 15-year sentence for that small amount of piece of cocaine. He's not selling to kids, man. That statute shouldn't have been applicable to him. We had another story where a guy was driving through a school zone with a small amount of marijuana on his person. Now, that school zone had been shut down for 8.5 months due to a black mold problem. The school wasn't even operational anymore. He was charged with this statute as well. So this bill is going to reduce it from 1,000 feet to 500 feet, and most importantly, give judges discretion to look on a case-by-case basis to say, okay, if you're selling to kids, you're going to jail for 15 years. Clearly. But if I, as a judge, can look at the case-by-case situation and say, like, he was driving, the school's not even in session. School's not operational. The school hasn't been open for 8.5 months, man. What are you talking about? Or alternatively, this guy's sitting in his home. He doesn't have enough to sell to anybody, let alone even partly use himself. He's not selling to kids. I'm not sending a 22-year-old kid for jail for 22 years, ruining his entire life. This bill, that's what passed both chambers yesterday, goes to Governor Lee's desk. That's why I want to make it a part of the Greatest Audience in the Nation appreciation segment, because I'm telling y'all, Shine, back me up on this again. The amount of work that the Real News community through AFP put into doing some of this stuff. I'm talking like making phone calls. I'm talking sending text messages. I'm talking signing online petitions. I'm talking sending these petitions to your friends, peer-to-peer outreach. I'm talking starting conversations organically, word of mouth type stuff. I mean, it was thing after thing after thing that we asked y'all to do, not just on this, for the larger criminal justice reform bucket that AFP has been working on for this entire legislative session and last year as well. Everything that we asked y'all to do, y'all stepped up and delivered on and went well beyond expectations. So in all sincerity, We cannot thank you enough for the effort that you put in. We cannot thank you enough for making those phone calls, for working the long hours with us, for coming out and helping shine on weekends, putting that silly headset on and calling people, to sending a text message to somebody else, to clicking on a link and actually put your information in. That is the type of stuff that garners these wins. So take it, man. Take a victory lap with us. Am I wrong in this, Shine? Am I blowing it up too much? Because I'm telling you, man, it's without that effort on their end, we don't see wins like this, no?
Yeah, I mean, and also, too, you got to give, as much as I want to give my activists a pat on the back, which everyone did a great job, I got to thank AFP for picking a winning thing to put the weight behind. This was a great idea. It's something that resonated with the average person, with most people, with every reasonable person. Because it seemed like there was injustices that were incentivized based on the current law. And I think that we've taken a great step as a community, as a state, to prevent some of those injustices from happening in the future. But a big thanks to all the activists that took action on that particular push to get that passed through the House and Senate. It's on the way to the governor's desk now. But also a big thanks to AFP Tennessee for picking something that was good to throw weight behind and to move forward, because there was all kinds of criminal justice reform stuff in the legislature, and AFP did a great job picking the things that would help the most people and be able to get across the finish line. So great on the organization, great on the activists, and you know what? Great on you, Grant. You were down there actually talking to people about this kind of stuff in person, the legislators and the legislative assistants and all those different people. So props to you as well.
Yeah, man. And we're going to have many more updates on the bills that are still moving through right now, on the bills that I know you guys put a lot of effort into to helping pass, change, make reforms, get things right in this state. I mean, we have all kind of bills coming up with healthcare related issues. There's professional property tax stuff that we could talk about. There's taxation stuff we could talk about, educational stuff we could talk about. So there's a lot of other stuff that's coming down the pipe here. So just keep all that in mind. And again, I just wanted to pause one final time and say to y'all in particular, thank you so much. To AFP's leadership, thank you so much. Yeah, and let me read our state director's statement here. This is coming from Tori Venable, as the state director of Americans for Prosperity, about this particular bill. She went on to say, for too long, our state has had some of the harshest drug-free zone laws in the country that wasted taxpayer dollars and targeted people with no intention of interacting with children. That's very important. The legislature took a huge step toward making our criminal justice system more just and ending the draconian practice of punishing people for far longer than necessary to achieve public safety. Thank you to all the members who worked together across party lines to pass these reforms, saving taxpayer dollars and righting a wrong that has been unjustly served to Tennesseans. Now, you'll notice there real quick, too, man, something we kind of glossed over quickly. She focused two particular times on the amount of savings. That is if I'm being completely candid with the audience, that is a major reason, or at least one of the reasons why this moves through so swiftly again this particular year. This bill saves in excess of $18 to $20 million plus dollars. Now, I say in excess of just what we know about the people that have been convicted of a crime like this, that probably maybe shouldn't have. That will save the Tennessee taxpayer $20 million. Now, it could be in excess of up to about $80 million, I've heard Representative Curcio say, because those statistics about the savings do not include plea deals, meaning those that would not have plea deals coupled with this going forward, because you don't have that leverage arm anymore, you could save well in excess of $20 million. So somewhere between $20 and $80 million is what we could save by a bill like this. So, man, across the board, criminal justice reform supporters love it. Republicans love it because they're saving money. It's a good thing all over. And in my opinion, the true reason why this is such a great thing is it solves generational problems, man. If you can keep a father in the home, if you keep a mother in the home for one more generation, man, I'm telling you, that's the root of all this. Moving on real quickly. Metro Council, we've been talking about it, and it happened. We've been asking for some help. We've been asking for some fights. We've been trying to fight the good fight in this thing. We're bringing it to everyone's attention, but this is just the times we live in. Metro Council approves a 34% property tax increase in the new budget. Now, yes, it was 34, and I stress the 4 part of that 30 as opposed to 32 because Mayor Cooper's proposal was 32. But this budget proposal coming from Bob Mendez, if you open up the story here, it's Fox 17. Metro Nashville Council voted in favor of a new budget in another marathon meeting. It was Budget Chair Council Bob Mendez His proposal of a 34% property tax increase. Now, this budget passed 32-8 after a debate that started Tuesday night. So 32-8, I mean, there was always going to be, something like this was always going to happen. Let's be for real. This is Mayor Cooper. He went on to say the crisis budget approved tonight stabilizes Metro finances and maintains essential services. The large tax increase is something I would not have considered were we not facing Nashville's greatest financial challenge. I thank Bob Mendes and the Council for the leadership. He went on to say that the 2021 budget process is proof positive that here in Nashville, we can still have collaborative working relationships in our politics. The end result, a budget built on compromise and full of tough choices, provides stable financial footing for our city's future. Now I'm trying to find this point here. Yeah, skip down a couple paragraphs, yada, yada, a couple paragraphs, skip past that italicized portion. The interesting thing I would consider here too, just in light of what's been going on, that paragraph that says the budget also increases. The budget also increases the budget for Metro Nashville Police Department by $2.6 million against the objection of several city council members and protesters who'd actually been calling for defunding the city's police department. The department said the increase of police funding will go to hire more recruits, not less. It also includes $2.1 million for a full deployment of body-worn cameras, $229,000 to hire a chief diversity officer and workforce diversity manager. It's still Tennessee. It's still Tennessee, y'all. I'm telling you. I mean, it's a blue city for sure, but it's still Tennessee. All right. So even when you're talking about, defunding the police and the property tax increase that we have, it's not going to happen in Tennessee, at least not in Nashville for sure. I'll tell you that much. It's just not a narrative it's carrying well. It was misphrased to begin with, but that's my take on it. Shine, though, you had a good point on this, man, when we were talking about that this morning, right?
Well, I did. I kind of remember what it was. I'm stuck on this. The budget will raise property taxes $1,000 per $100 of the property's assessed value.
Yeah.
That's when it gets real. You talk about 34%. I don't know. That doesn't seem that real. But when you think of that, you can actually start imagining the numbers. Downtown, adding maybe tens of thousands of dollars to the average property tax bill for a downtown property restaurant owner or bar owner or all the things that make Nashville a draw. All those people wanting to move there. And they're not moving there because Nashville schools are just so great, right? And they're not moving there because they like the Predators or, and it's all the things, yes. But really, it's like the reason people move there is they want to be a part of the scene.
Yeah.
They're taxing the golden goose. I don't think it's going to work out well. But, I guess before the show, me and you were talking a little bit about these 13 businesses that got fined by the Metro Health Department. And now they're going to get a letter saying their taxes have gone up $1,000 per $100 that their business is valued at, that their property's valued at. It's a pretty bad day to be a business owner in Nashville. Well, to get the fines, get the increased taxes. You're getting told, hey, you're going to have to pay tens of thousands of more dollars, but don't put too many customers in there. Don't make too much money.
And Eric said in Facebook a second ago too. What happens when that money doesn't cover it? What happens when they mishandle it? Since they're good at being bad. We didn't get all the money back spent by Barry during her little fling with her head of security. How much money was that, by the way, Eric? It was a couple $100,000, wasn't it? During head of security, she didn't get in trouble at all, really. And I think it's a wink to others who may want to abuse tax dollars. And here's the thing, man, what you're talking about, right? The budget increase, the budget will raise property taxes by $1.006.
Oh, see, I said 1,000. I'm sorry. That Daniel just corrected me. I was looking at all the zeros. It's $1.0006 per 100. That's okay. That's a little bit. That's not nearly as bad. I was going to say it's better. It's not as bad.
Well, but your point still remains, though, Shine, because everybody knows that what happens with a property tax increase like this, especially for rental properties in Nashville, and let's be honest, especially for dense areas like a metropolitan area like Nashville is, those property tax increases are just going to pass directly on to renters. That's exactly what's going to happen.
Oh, and I've heard rent in Nashville is so affordable,
dude. It's.
This is already, I mean, it's like, they're not paying anything for rent in Nashville. We might as well raise the rent on everybody.
That's the sole reason why I live in an hour outside of Nashville, and I have to drive there to the legislature 3 to 4 days a week. Right? It's because rent's so affordable in Nashville.
Hey, and we want to throw something out there too. This isn't meant to be disparaging on anybody, but the time to be mad about this is not today. The time to have been mad about this was 3 months ago, when they said told you exactly what they were going to do. They said, hey, we're going to raise taxes by 30-something%. It was like 32, 34, 38. Numbers were thrown out there. The time to be upset about something is not after. It's before. I've seen a lot of people who I don't know, that like Grant and I know. Like maybe people who've watched the show before and stuff like that, and they're like, how did this happen? And it's like, well, it happened because, we didn't organize. People didn't get passionate about the issue. There were 10,000 people down pushing for a certain issue downtown over the past couple of weeks, and they didn't even get what they wanted. So if we just post on Facebook, and, I'm not disparaging the 30, 40 people that went down to the barbecue restaurant to talk about no property taxes. They did a great job. But it's going to take more than 30 or 40 people going down to a barbecue restaurant in order to keep taxes from going up in a time like this. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that the time to get upset is way before. The time to say, what do I do? How can I stop this? Is way before. And I only say that because there'll be other issues. We don't need to dwell on that. We don't need to dwell on it, but there'll be other issues. And the time to get organized is before, not after.
Yeah, and actually, a way to connect the two stories of what you're talking about at the time to get organized, the protest that happened over this last weekend for enacting, reform on the policing community. There was a sideline story that came out of that of 13 businesses that were fined for violating COVID restrictions. And part of what a lot of people are saying now is like, hang on, man. So hold on. So while we're in the midst of some controversy about whether there should be a shutdown or not shutdown, or reopen or not reopen, and people are slightly confused as to which laws are applicable to which parties, you're shutting down a lot of business and you're increasing property taxes, man. So, the last I heard, the overwhelming majority of the budget in Nashville comes from sales taxes. I mean, sorry, from is that correct? Yeah. From property tax anyways. Maybe I'm wrong. I got to look that up. It doesn't matter. But the point still remains is that it's just difficult for people to get their head around this property tax increase. Bob said in Facebook a second ago, the way I read this is that 34% increase. So that's 34% more than it already is right now. Yes, that is absolutely correct. Hey, realnewsradio.live, realnewsradio.live. That's where you're going to find the central landing page, the hub of all this stuff. Shine, let's do a little live programming real quick. Do you want to go on to that DOJ throwing it down against Google story? You want to lighten it up a little bit with some meme review stuff? Where you want to go with this?
Stories.
DOJ throwing down? Let's do that. All right. So let's jump right into this then. All right. So this is one of the main headlines coming out of yesterday. If you want to follow along, have a bunch of other updates as well, unrelated to this story about cancel culture being alive and well in the show notes. By the way, quick plug up there at the top of the show notes section. It's the Evernote link. That's the best way to follow along with the show. A lot of updates about cancel culture stories. A lot of updates about statues that are being torn down. A lot of updates about what is and is not. Apparently, Britney Spears now is going to be replacing a lot of these statues. That's for real. There's a real petition going on about that. There's also a lot of updates about the Rayshard Brooks story. More on that to come here in a second, because I really want to get real news opinion on that. Here's the update, the big major update from yesterday, though. DOJ throwing down against Google. And Shine, go ahead and pull up that first YouTube video right there at that right after that portion of the show notes. It's the YouTube one that's yeah, exactly. Yeah. Let's go ahead and play that from the beginning, because it'll save me some time to actually explain what's going on, what the DOJ did yesterday. Go ahead and play that from the very beginning now.
Kelly, the Justice Department is unveiling a proposal to revamp liability protections for tech platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Google. It wants Congress to rewrite Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act to remove the liability shield for civil action if platforms are found to facilitate or solicit federal criminal activity, such as fraud or scams. The DOJ is also calling for specific carve-outs for child exploitation, terrorism, and cyberstalking, and it wants to make clear that liability protections won't extend to antitrust claims. The DOJ also says it wants to clarify the law by removing a reference to objectionable content and replacing it with a more concrete term, such as unlawful or content that promotes terrorism. Now, all of these changes could upend the business model for tech's biggest companies. Industry groups are against it. And the big caveat here is that the DOJ cannot do this alone. It would need Congress to act. However, while there are Republicans who would back this and even some Democrats who believe the law needs to be changed, Kelly, there's also a lot of skepticism that this is just another salvo in President Trump's war against big tech. Back over to you.
Elon, that said, these are relatively minor changes. Certainly, they still point in the direction of more maybe coming to the Section 230. But given that the president himself has tweeted about repealing it, does this feel to you like it's the first step in what could be more to come? Or would this be the total of what we see from the DOJ?
I think there could certainly be more to come across the government. The DOJ has been working on this for about a year, but it does dovetail with the president's recent executive order, which would require the FCC, or would at least ask the FCC, to promulgate new regulations in this space as well. So I think what you're seeing is a number of agencies take this on as the president becomes increasingly concerned that some of these platforms are perhaps violating free speech and also bias against conservatives.
Yeah. And,
all right, there you go, Sean.
Elon, we appreciate.
And there was a lot to unpack in that. It's one of the better clips that I could find specifically pertaining to this story. It's one of the only clips I could find pertaining to this story, but there was a lot delivered in that and a lot to unpack. And they covered a lot of it in what I would say unknowingly biased ways, but it also does a great job to open up the conversation. So in general, I think the big takeaway from what you're seeing here is the DOJ, they've been looking into this, researching this, investigating this. It doesn't matter which word you want to use, for about the last year to year and a half to possibly 2 years. And by this, I mean tech companies, Google, Amazon to some extent, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, doesn't necessarily matter. You fill in your tech company. Anybody that has Section 230 allowance applicable to that organization, that company, they've been looking into alleged violations or possible violations or what to do about updating this 1996 law for about the past 2 years. So the fact that this just update sort of came yesterday is obviously not coincidence at all. It's obviously in response to Google shutting down Zero Hedge and the Federalists' ability to make ad revenue from Google. Now, I would say the big takeaway there is what was mentioned a second ago, where she said, well, do you think this is just going to be the first opening sort of a salvo, or is this going to be all? Because it really doesn't do all that much. Well, all right, come on. It does way more than I think people would realize. Now, first and foremost, she is correct. The commentator is correct in saying that just this DOJ proclamation by itself is not necessarily going to do anything. There's a few other pieces that need to be put in place before anything can actually take effect. So on the one hand, you have to get some type of passage by Congress, but they did mention that both Democrats and Republicans seemingly have some sense of bipartisan support for a move like this. Frankly speaking, it's really just the libertarians that are out in lone left field as it pertains to not wanting to regulate these tech companies. And even some of them are saying, like, we're the ones that are getting shut down by it. If anybody's set up a problem, it's actually your anarcho-capitalist libertarian friends that are getting shut down. Now, they're still out in left field by themselves. So Congress would have to work. That's one element. Alternatively, this DOJ proclamation could also issue some type of regulations. Shine was actually picking up on this first and foremost the last couple of days, saying, I don't know, man, could we have some FEC jump in here or something? I mean, they're holding the same regulatory standards to the rest of modern media, be it print media.
Commerce clause doesn't seem to stop them from being in anybody else's business. You know what I mean? That's the way I feel about it. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the federal, they say they need Congress, but I don't think that's true. I think Congress could stop them from doing things that they want to do to regulate the tech companies.
That's a good point.
But I don't think they need any permission based on precedent in every other sector. I mean, even every other communication sector. I mean, even just FEC, right? If you just went with the FEC, I used to work at a radio station. I know people who've worked at television stations. For instance, radio, television, and newspaper can't turn down political advertising unless they turn down all political advertising. They can't favor one candidate over another or one race over another. They can't favor one party over another. So it's accept everything. And by the way, at the lowest price that you offer, that's a law, or accept nothing. They could do the same thing to social media platforms. You either accept nothing or you accept everything. I mean, we even saw Twitter voluntarily complying with this law, saying they won't accept any political advertising, even though that doesn't really apply to them. It only applies to newspapers, television, and radio. But Twitter went ahead and did it anyway, because that's the world we live in. That's the world. That's the way it is in media. They know it's coming. They especially know it's coming as it points to elections, because we've already had Twitter try to take down politicians. You know, I mean, I was just watching about Josh Hawley being told he had to take down tweets. He got a message from Twitter saying he had to take down tweets unless he deleted them in 30 minutes. If they keep doing stuff like that, it's definitely going to be an FEC deal, but it might also be FCC. But I mean, how many alphabet organizations are there? If the federal government got really upset with them, they could bug them with all the alphabet organizations at the same time. So I don't really think they need Congress. That would just make it easier. But it doesn't make it impossible without congressional action.
And I actually tend to agree with you on that as well. I mean, if the DOJ has their mind set on doing something about that, they are going to accomplish their goal one way or another, be it through, I was going to say legitimate means. They're all going to be legitimate means in the traditional sense of legal means. You get what I'm saying? It just, in my opinion, they're going to accomplish their goal one way or another, whether it be we're actually trying to get at Section 230 or we're just upset with you and you need to like slow your roll, like know your role type thing, right? Because Facebook, Google, all these folks are kind of stepping outside the bounds of what Section 230 is. Here's the idea that really comes down to. This is Attorney General Barr. You can see this linked in the show notes section. It's directly from the .gov, justice.gov website. This is the exact disclosure. They said Section 230 was originally enacted to protect, and again, I don't think I need to do this, but real quickly, Section 230 basically says, social media companies, you're a platform. If I, Grant Henry, go out there and, type something defamatory about David Shine Thompson on Facebook, Facebook cannot be held legally liable for what I said. Alternatively, if I write a letter to the New York Times and do the same thing, defaming David Shine Thompson, and they print it, New York Times can be held legally liable for that defamatory statement, right? That's the difference, the main difference here. Anyways, back to it. Section 230 was originally enacted to protect developing technology by providing that online platforms were not liable for third-party content on their services or for the removal of such content in certain circumstances. This immunity was meant to nurture emerging internet businesses and to overrule a judicial precedent that had rendered online platforms liable for all third-party content on their services if they restricted some harmful content. The idea was, if we don't allow this platform thing to take place, like the internet's not going to happen. Like it's just not going to happen. We will sue the internet out of existence. That's a gross overstatement. It's hyperbole, but you get where they're coming from. They went on to say, however, combination of 25 years of drastic technological changes and an expansive statutory interpretation left online platforms unaccountable for a variety of harms flowing from content on their platforms and with virtually unfettered discretion to censor third-party content with little transparency or accountability. Following the completion of its review, the Department of Justice determined that the Section 230 is ripe for reform and identified and developed 4 categories of wide-ranging recommendations. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. So if this story wasn't interesting enough already, these wide-ranging categories, you heard them talk before about the T word, implying terror. It's really interesting, man, because what they're doing with that language of saying, let me read it up here again, because I couldn't follow this for a second. The quote that came directly from Attorney General Barr, he said, when it comes to issues of public safety, the government is the one who must act on behalf of society at large. Law enforcement cannot delegate our obligations to protect the safety of American people purely to the judgment of profit-seeking private firms. So what they're doing is, man, they're restricting that application of First Amendment and making private companies come more into line with the First Amendment, basically saying, unless you're restricting speech for the safety, for the public welfare, for the safety of your users, you have to be like dead in line with the First Amendment. It's a very interesting take here. I did not think for a second that the angle to get this in, the angle to shoehorn this in here through for a First Amendment conversation was to look at the idea of like, look, man, if you're playing the role of legal or law enforcement, you can do that. You can protect public safety, but otherwise, you know what I'm saying? How that totally reforms the conversation. They also talk about this idea of to address illicit content. The aspect of public safety and incentivizing online platforms to address illicit content says these things here we're clearly defining now what you can and cannot censor, much as we would do with print media, much as we do with television media. If you're going to be a publisher or something. If you want to be a platform, these are the specific things that you're allowed to censor. If you censor anything else, you're now a publisher like New York Times. You get what I'm saying? They went on to say promoting open discourse and greater transparency. But the most interesting thing that I found, at least one of the most interesting things that I found here, there's the very last thing, promoting competition. This dude, this is sort of the, I don't know, this is the icing on the cake. This is the cherry on the top. This is whatever adage you want to use. That thing at the very bottom of the show notes here, promoting competition, it's all in highlighted section. A fourth category of reform is to make clear, this is directly language from Justice Department, to make clear that federal antitrust claims are not and were never intended to be covered by Section 230 immunity. I want to pause for a second there because that's basically AG Barr saying like, okay, dude, here's the game. The gauntlet's been thrown down. You guys either play ball or we're basically just going to call you Monopoly and break you up. Like that's what's going to happen. And I'm not even advocating for one side or the other now. I'm just laughing at the situation that we're in right now because
AG Barr says, hey, do you remember Ma Bell?
Right.
Do you remember when Ma Bell ran everything? Well, we broke that up too. And they thought they were gods.
Yes.
And they were to a point. I mean, they controlled communication through telephone. I mean, that was telephone. It's like Ma Bell was the equivalent in their industry of like Kleenex is for facial tissue. Ma Bell was telephones, just like Google is search engine. Google is video. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and listen, y'all, this is where I'm stuck in a very weird spot right now because in this particular day and age, I'm forced to recognize market force response. And I'll explain that in just 1 second because you know where I've stood in this from the very beginning. And I do mean the beginning of real news 3 or 4 years back when these stories just started surfacing. And I still hold to this principle now, at least to some extent. I don't like any of this necessarily. At a fundamental level, at the core, my whatever libertarian veins I still have left pumping the libertarian blood through me, if that is a thing still, I don't like this. I don't like the idea of government getting involved in private enterprise, private industry at all, and to some extent, regardless of how big it is. That's how dedicated I am to free market principles. Now, here's what's happening, though. Free market is taking over. The free market response is taking over. So if somebody thinks that something's being done unfairly, look what happened last time. Look what happened in 2016. Republicans felt like they'd been treated unfairly for about 30, 40 years, and we got Trump. I'm not going to explain the reasons as to why that's a coherent statement to make, but that's exactly what happened. President Trump's reaction to the market forces, that's exactly what happened. Republicans felt like they've been silenced for a very long time. This is what's happening right now. Conservative individuals or whoever feels like they've been silenced on these social media platforms that to some small extent, we are all compelled to use. We are forced to use. Gmail, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. In a modern day and age, it's somewhat difficult to get by, to apply to jobs, to receive jobs, to anything, and not have one of those accounts. So the market force reaction by the DOJ is basically to say, like, look, y'all, you guys changed the rules of this game. Jordan Peterson says all the time that we have this sort of inherent need, this drive, this sort of like built into our DNA that we just want to play fairly. We don't mind losing. Nobody minds losing as long as you lose the game in a fair and equitable way. But if people are not working in equity to play fairly, if they're going to change the rules of the game on the other side, some people are going to change these rules back. And I think that's a little bit of what's happening. Listen to this statement one more time. Lastly, promoting competition. A fourth category of reform is to make clear that federal antitrust claims are not and were never intended to be covered by Section 230 immunity. Over time, the avenues for engaging in both online commerce and speech have concentrated in the hands of a few key players. It makes little sense to enable large online platforms, particularly dominant ones, to invoke Section 230 in antitrust cases where liability is based on harm to competition, not on third-party speech. Breaking that down, here's exactly what that says. That's essentially the DOJ saying, look, you know what? Even if I can't get Congress to pass Section 230 or to reform it, doesn't matter. even if I can't get these, FEC or the alphabet sort of a regulatory boys to do some more regulations, doesn't matter. You know why it doesn't matter? Because your immunity protection doesn't protect you from antitrust claims. So we got a three-pronged attack here, y'all. We got Congress attacking you. We have the regulations attacking you. And if none of that works, we're just going to break you up as a monopoly because your immunity doesn't apply to that anyways. So I go back to the original clip that we started this entire thing with, where the CNBC folks are like, well, it's just a little, it's small. It's just an opening little salvo. It doesn't really mean all that much. This is huge. This is paradigm shifting stuff here, man. This is the DOJ throwing down the gauntlet, saying we are going to get you somehow. And if these three-pronged attacks don't matter for you, think about the fourth one being you have shareholders you got to do something with. Absolutely, this is going to affect the stock prices of some of these companies. Guaranteed if it hasn't already. I haven't even looked at that stuff, but I guarantee if you Google that right now, you can find a story about stock prices crashing, Facebook and Google and blah.
Well, especially if you couple that with the Federalist story.
Yeah.
If you couple that with the story of, it's not just that they own these platforms, which are basically monopolistic. All other websites seem to be dependent on Google for ads. So they can shut down competition by not allowing them to make money off their ad platform. And then the fact that they got caught doing that for an arbitrary reason the other day, in conjunction with that particular entity's competition, and then them bragging about it in public, that NBC and Google worked together to shut down NBC's competition, that just makes it even more clear. And to me, it's like, even for our libertarian friends that are scared of government intruding on business, like, the only reason this is weird for people is because it's on the internet. If in real life businesses weren't letting certain people with certain ideologies into their business to do business, people would be offended by that and ask government to do something about it. That's just the case. That is just the case. But that's not even what we're talking about. We're not talking about a television channel. I'll even get more media as an example, like CNN being forced to have on conservative commentators or something like that. This is the equivalent of one day Fox News gets kicked off Comcast. That's what this is the equivalent of. Fox News gets kicked off of cable providers, canceling their contracts because the terms of service with Comcast has changed, but canceling their contract and then saying we won't let certain ideologies on our platform of our cable provider, and we also won't let you have it on our platform of internet service, so you can't go to that website anymore. That's an equivalent example. Not like, it's not like CNN not being allowed to have a conservative or being forced to have a conservative commentator. It's more like a street owned by a private corporation lets certain people walk on it and won't let other people walk on it, or will let certain people rent the property in order to make business and not other people with certain ideologies rent the property to do business. And if any of those things actually happened in the real world, people would be able to sue, and people would find that distasteful. A reasonable person would find it distasteful. But because it's not physical places, and I think this has a lot to do with how our society is changing, it's harder in these digital spaces, Grant, maybe you agree, to like apply real world psychology to them. Because they're intangible. They're not, YouTube is not a building. It's a place. It's a portal that we go through and see things and hear things. But do you get what I'm saying? Like a real equivalent example is if one day Fox News just disappeared off of Comcast and you couldn't use Comcast internet to get to Fox News's website. And it was obvious based on their statements and things that people who work for Comcast had said that the only reason they did it was because of their ideology, not because they failed to pay or didn't meet a contractual obligation or something like that. And lots of people would be upset. Or let's say it wasn't a conservative thing. Let's just say it was random. Like, we don't want the National Geographic Channel, so we just canceled their contract. And National Geographic can't sue because we're not filling the contract, and it's because they played some weird history we don't like, right? Mm-hmm. That would be the equivalent. And we wouldn't accept that anywhere in society. But for some reason, as our culture is accepting it, with Google and Amazon and PayPal and other places like that. And to me, that's very odd, but I think it's because it's digital and it's hard for people to get their heads around it.
Eric said a second ago that Candace Owens has released a video in her Facebook group saying she's taking Facebook to court. She lowered up and explains exactly why she decided to do this. It's worth checking out. To Shine's point a second ago, one of the recommendations under the idea of promoting open discourse and greater transparency from the DOJ has been that to reform the section of the statute that provides for the definition of quote unquote good faith to clarify its original purpose. I think a lot of the problem has come in with exactly what Shine's talking about. It's difficult to get a psychological understanding as to why certain things are being shut down and why others are not. Because a lot of this stuff is just built into the algorithms shutting stuff down. And whether that's a subjective component or not, no one can tell. If it is subjective, then maybe there's a motivation behind it. If it's not subjective, that is to say that it's just something that's generally applicable to whatever information's out there, and there's no political bias in shutting something down, well, then maybe we have a better definition of good faith. But that idea of what is deemed good faith in censoring certain content over another possibly needs to be revisited. But frankly, to end the story here, I'm still kind of on the side with Kelly in Facebook. And I don't know if I think she's talking about this particular story, but she says slippery, slippery, slippery. And I'm still a little bit on the side of Kelly here, where as much as conservatives are suffering with this, as much as, to be completely honest, Facebook, Google, all of them are being directly violative of Section 230. I have no problem updating Section 230 at all. I really do not have any problem. In fact, I would advocate strongly for updating Section 230. I think that is Congress's role. It's the role of our representatives in a representative republic to update the way that these laws are applicable to these companies. I don't necessarily like the executive branch doing it carte blanche or unilaterally, though. I do have a problem with that. With that being said, Sean, we got 10 minutes left in the show here, buddy.
Hey, real quick, I want to read Daniel Snowden's comment about political ideology not being a protected class. And in some cases, that's true. But the speech of our elected representatives and their competition when elections are on is protected speech. It's protected by the FEC, maybe not by other things that you would think of as protected classes. But like I said, in other media, you can't restrict political speech. You have to take it if they're paying for it. And you have to charge them the lowest amount. And we just had a judge say that Donald Trump couldn't be kicked off Twitter and he couldn't block anybody because his speech is something that people need to have access to. Right? Mm-hmm. So you're already seeing... Maybe there's not something in the, what would it be, 14th Amendment grant that talks about, or the 64 Civil Rights Act, all the title this and title that,
7, I think, yeah,
Title 7 and all those things. Those talk about protected classes, but this is a different thing. This is not in the same space. So maybe the words protected aren't the right words, but we do glorify political speech. Like, think about companies that are allowed to start PACs and things. You know what I'm saying? Like, businesses are allowed to have invisible speech, like invisible political speech is even allowed and protected and enshrined under law. People are allowed to have political speech and you don't know who they are. That's allowed. You know what I'm saying? So there's all kinds of, if it's not necessarily codified in something like the 64 Civil Rights Act, it's all over the place. It's in regulations and other things, but there is an idea of political protected speech, especially from our representatives.
But it is codified in Section 230 as it currently stands. That's what I was trying to explain with that good faith statement I went on before. I don't think maybe I didn't explain that properly because I was actually responding to Daniel's comment without actually saying I was responding to that. He's correct. The political ideology is not protected under, say, Title 7 as, say, race, sex, national origin, something like that. Religion would be, okay? But in Section 230, it clearly articulates and it clearly states that in media or whatever, organizations that are considered platforms cannot discriminate based solely upon political ideology. They cannot discriminate based upon solely situations or language or anything else that they personally disagree with. Now, if it's a part of terms and services or something that's violative of those terms and services, if it's a part of something that's going to enact violence or whatever else, that's fine. But there has to be a ubiquitous law that's applicable to everybody. And it specifically states there cannot be a subjective component to censoring one political speech over another. That is already in Section 230. And that's, I think, what the DOJ is attacking here is by saying, we think We think that these social media platforms are censoring one political ideology over another because they don't like certain speech as opposed to another. Now, the problem is that is near impossible to prove. How do you prove that? How would you, as the average individual, go about showing that it was a social media company's intent to censor one thing over another? Well, you could come back and say, well, Mr. Henry, look, I can have 60, 70, 80% of the people that have been censored all have very, very similar worldviews. Well, okay, fine. That could just be there was a unilateral law that was applicable to everybody, and people on the left just weren't violating that law, or that rule, rather, that rule. It could be that they said something. Could be that they brought up a topic. Could be that they talk about the T word all the time, terror or something. Could be that they talk about the G word all the time, the things that go bang, bang. I don't know, man, whatever the thing is. Now, you could say, well, that's clearly showing bias. That's clearly showing intent, is it? I don't know, not necessarily. That's the reason why they're saying it has to be good faith. That's the portion of updating the good faith. So yes, Title VII may not be applicable, but Section 230 already says you can't do what you're clearly doing. That's what's so problematic. This thing was written in 1996, and everybody that's rational knows, dude, come on, man. Clearly, they're only censoring one side. We all know this. Just update the law to be able to do something about it, right? Speaking of updating the law, man, let me end the show here, Shine, because we only have 7 minutes left. And if we get kicked for this last story, it is what it is. But it's something I've been wanting to get to all day. It's that Rayshard Brooks update. And you can pull up the stories behind me while I'm talking, Shine, if you want to. The stories are possibly only necessary just to show or introduce the next topic at hand. CNN headline says that ex-police officer who killed Rayshard Brooks is now charged with felony murder charges. Now, again, I don't. It's been a while since I've been in law school, but I think the basic definition of felony murder, if somebody else out there knows better than I do, please let me know. But I'm pretty sure the basic definition of felony murder charge is like if a murder was committed in the commission of another felony, that's felony murder. Chime was telling me before he was listening to the
that's what the prosecutor said. I watched the whole thing yesterday, and that's basically, he said that's why you see all these other charges, because it isn't about the felony murder, it's about all these other charges. But because all these because someone died with all these other charges, that makes it felony murder. It's actually aggravated assault was what he was charged with the label. It's like hashtag felony murder or something like that. You know what I mean? I mean, that's really from a layman's point of view, but
it's meant to kind of like broaden the crime of murder in a very, very general sense, right? So when someone kills another individual, regardless of the intent to kill, that's the important point here with felony murder. Regardless of the intent to kill, if it was done in the commission of a dangerous crime or a felony, the offender and also the offender's accomplices may actually be found guilty of murder regardless of the intent to kill. If a killing did take place while you were doing something else that was considered a felony, the intent to kill that person doesn't necessarily matter, as it would matter in another unrelated charge. Not unrelated, but another.
Here's a dumb question from a person who's not a lawyer. Does murder mean the intent to kill somebody? Not just killing somebody? Is that what murder technically? I don't know. I mean, I'm asking as a
I think
person.
that's probably the best way to put it, man. Yeah,
because you just said like it's felony murder because even though you didn't intend to kill somebody, you did kill somebody. I didn't know if it had to do with death or intent, or the combination of both. But also not a criminal defense attorney, or prosecutor.
Well, and that's why the prosecutor was focusing so heavily on all the other related charges, because if you can prove those other related charges, the felony murder kind of takes care of itself. Like if you can prove that a felony took place and you hit all the elements of those other felonies and someone was killed in the commission of all those other felonies, well, then you basically prove the felony murder element, right? Because felony murder, again, is just, did a felony happen? Did a guy get killed? That's all said and done. The point is that it's usually a little bit, not easier. I think the best way to say this is that a lot of the times your average citizen will be hit with a felony murder charge. Very rarely will an officer be hit with a felony murder charge. That is what took place yesterday in Atlanta. Now, again, we all know the story of Rayshard Brooks. I don't know if it's even necessary to go over all the details as to how that went down. If you need an update, though, this is a quick. I'm hoping I can remain bias-free if I'm explaining how this thing went down. It's not even worth showing a video for. Guy was in a Wendy's drive-thru. He was drunk. Fell asleep at the wheel. Cops come up and knock on the window. He pulls over. They have a very, very long conversation. At the end of it, they want to arrest him. They do a field sobriety, yada, yada, all the stuff. At the end of it, they want to arrest him. 41-minute conversation. At the end of it, they want to arrest him for a DUI. He then ends up resisting arrest. They scuffle around. They wrestle
for 41 minutes to get him to agree to a breathalyzer, by the way. That's why it took so long. After 41 minutes, he finally agreed to the breathalyzer. He blew a 1.8. 0.08 was the legal limit in Georgia, and it was like right after that. Like immediately after he blew, he's like, well, that's a violation of the law, so we're going to have to put you in handcuffs. And that's when the scuffle started.
I don't necessarily know if this aspect of the story is even worth mentioning, but it is the aspect that the narrative is being focused on in the media, so that is the only reason why I will mention it right now as well. It was 2 Caucasian officers and an African-American male, clearly. So the 2 Caucasian officers then end up, wrestling around with this African-American male for a while. I don't know how long that scuffle happens for. During the portion, the African-American male takes the taser from one of the officers. They end up punching back and forth a little while. The African-American male escapes, gets free, and starts running away, while one of the other officers is pursuing. The African-American male turns backwards. At that point, the police officer had put his own taser that he'd already fired upon the individual. You can only fire these things once. He'd already fired upon the individual. They're running down. It's all happening in the Wendy's parking lot. They're running down. The officer puts the taser back in his right holster, pulls his side firearm, his pistol, his sidearm, pulls his sidearm out, tells him, hey, to stop or whatever. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's not, I don't know if he's told him to stop or not, whatever. The African-American male turns back with the taser in his hand, looks as if he's going to indicate that he's going to shoot it. And then that's when the officer, I believe, fires 3 shots, 2 of which hits the individual, one of which actually hit a car that was parked in the drive-thru. That's the quick update as to what the story is. That's what the officer was charged with felony murder for. Now, in reaction to this Washington Post story that came out yesterday as well, is now that Atlanta, a multitude of Atlanta police officers called in sick yesterday and saying like, hey, here's the headline in Washington Post. Atlanta police call out sick to protest murder charge against officer who shot Rayshard Brooks. Now, hopefully, I've remained as bias-free as possible when presenting the story as to where we're up right now, because my intention today is not at all to make a statement on this. My intention today is just to draw back to one simple thing that I've tried to draw back to every single time one of these stories have come up. The fundamental question that's the heart of all of this conversation, from the kneeling stuff in the NFL to everything else, is to what standard are we going to hold police officers, law enforcement officers, applicable to in comparison to an average citizen? This is Code of Hammurabi stuff. This is Greco-Roman time stuff. This fundamental question is as old as human civilization. From the very beginning, when societies had said, "Hey, we want to specifically say that this certain number of individuals are responsible for enforcing the law and maintaining civility." Because we're asking those people to go out there every single day and maintain civility, we are technically asking them to risk, in a legal sense, risk more than your average citizen would. On behalf of the state, don't call it the state. On behalf of the collection of people, don't call it the collection of people, I don't care. On behalf of the contract, whatever you want to call it, whether it's a privatized force or not, on behalf of the exchange, we have specifically asked these individuals in the scope of their employment to go out and do things that your average citizen would not do, should not do, actually, to maintain order and in our society. So the fundamental question comes down to, okay, so where is that middle ground? Where's the middle ground between what we should hold an officer responsible for, knowing that we've asked them to do far more than you and I would ever need to do, in comparison with what an average citizen should be held responsible to as well? And here's the questions I want to ask for the audience as well. And I'm literally just want to know where people stand as it pertains specifically to that felony murder charge yesterday. And if you can help me on the show, I mean, in the Facebook comments, YouTube comments, whatever else, that would be absolutely awesome. I'll go over 10, 15 minutes here. I don't care, because I think this is super important. As it pertains specifically to this case, do you think this charge was the correct one? That's the first question. This charge of felony murder was the correct one. I asked that question because one of my biggest fears out of this charge and the Minneapolis police officer charges as well deals slightly with ex post facto. This officer is going to be held accountable to the laws that were on the books at the time that thing happened. If, for example, the Atlanta City Council or the state of Georgia, or it doesn't matter, if they passed laws that would make it different for what an officer is held accountable towards after this took place, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. He can only be held accountable for what the law was at the time that this thing took place. It's called ex post facto. I believe that's how it would operate. It would happen. So the first question I have is, do you think that was the correct charge? I'm worried because it seems like this is a fairly difficult charge to make. It's a fairly difficult charge to get a conviction on for an officer as the law currently stands. Are we following with that, by the way? Sean, let me know if I'm going too fast or getting too much in the weeds here, man, because here's what I'm saying.
It's very difficult to not get in the weeds. It's very difficult because, like, everyone has various levels of understanding of the rules that govern police behavior, because there are rules per department. Then there are laws, state laws and federal laws. Most people don't know these things. I don't know these things, and it's very difficult. It's difficult to have even a layman's opinion on this kind of thing, because even listening to what you're saying, it's almost like if we had everyone do homework and go watch The Prosecutor yesterday, then go watch a bunch of people who disagreed with the decision of the prosecutor, but everyone's all seen the same evidence. Then maybe we can have a layman's conversation about it. I'm not saying you shouldn't be talking about it, by the way. I'm just like describing the problem of talking about it. But all we can do is go off of, what we're talking about. So like even what you just said about they'll be held accountable to the laws that were on the books. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like the core of what you were just saying anyway. I think the prosecutor anticipated this. Some of the crimes that were, because it wasn't just felony murder. It was like 11 or 12 charges. And I think 4 or 5 of those charges were violations of oath. There were certain things that he did that were violations of Atlanta City ordinance police rules that officer has taken an oath to not do. Okay? Like, it's against the officer's oath to even shoot a taser at someone running away in the city of Atlanta. You get what I'm saying? So there's a lot of, like, city of Atlanta stuff that the guy violated blatantly, that he did. He just did. That, at least based on the evidence that the prosecutor showed in the, and there was no defense attorney there, right? It was just the prosecutor, no judge saying this is admissible and not admissible and things like that. But based on the evidence I saw, it looked like the prosecutor made a decent case that he violated some of the, I don't know if it's code of ethics. He called them violation of oaths. So I think they are ready for that argument of, well, he's not really just indicting the officer. He's indicting certain state laws with a bias towards Atlanta's governing system towards police and saying, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? And you can definitely feel the friction between this prosecutor and the GBI, even though they tried to act like the GBI, it's all good. We're working together and they helped us get evidence. But the GBI hasn't even finished its investigation either. And this guy's already trying to set up indictments, and he's issuing warrants and things like that when the GBI hasn't even finished its investigation. So there's a lot of weird things going on, and it's very difficult to say whether or not I think this charge is too much, even though we have like 7 or 8 videos. We have witness testimonies. Right. Another thing, too, that's just like weird, but no one's talking about it. That guy's getting charged for aggravated assault against the random person where the bullet went in the car.
Oh, really? Okay.
The white Bronco that got hit by a bullet, he's getting charged for a felony aggravated assault against that guy.
See, you and I would get charged with that as well.
That's where I think we can have an interesting discussion. It's not necessarily, do you think this police was overcharged, undercharged, or whatever? Is there a fundamental difference between you, someone acting on your own volition, doing your own thing, like I need to go to the store or I need to go to Wendy's. Let's say I need to go to Wendy's and wait in the drive-thru and get some nuggets. Is there a difference between you and someone doing what their employer asked them to do? Is there a difference between that? Because it's not just police officers. It's in people who are acting under the orders of their employment.
Exactly.
Like, is there a difference between a regular person doing their own thing and someone doing something while they're employed? But for the city of Atlanta telling him to work that night, he wouldn't have been there.
Right, dude.
And that's a weird thing.
Eric said on Facebook a second ago, he said, to me, it sounds like that the responsibility should mean that they are held to higher standards, not lower legal standards, but held to higher legal standards. And that's what I'm saying. So I think the scenario, just like Stein just presented, let's say that I have, I don't know, a farm with a bunch of like prize winning chickens out there. Okay. And every single night there's a bunch of wolves that come out there and want to eat my chickens. But I also have a neighbor who has a bunch of prize winning dogs that look like wolves. Okay, maybe they're I don't know, huskies or whatever they are, but they look like wolves. So I want to protect my chickens. So I then end up going to hire someone to say, hey, I need you to patrol around this fence of chickens with a firearm. And if wolves come on here, you need to shoot them. But if you shoot the neighbor's dogs, you're going to be held responsible. Now, here's the situation in some small sense that we're asking for police officers. Should the person that I hire be held to a higher legal standard to protect my property than I would be held to protect my property? That's the basic fundamental question. We as a society have hired police officers and said, please go protect and maintain order. We could do it for ourselves. But if I hire an individual to protect my personal property, should that person be held to a higher legal standard than I would even be held to? If it's not a crime for me to shoot in the general direction, this is a total hypothetical. If it's not a crime for me to shoot in the general direction of my neighbor's dog because I mistook it for a wolf, should it be a crime for the person I hired to shoot in the general direction of my neighbor's dog because he mistook it for a wolf? You know what I'm saying? Should that person be held more responsible than me because it's my stuff? Technically, we don't need police officers, man, right? I think the idea that I'm putting out there, the reason why society is where it is right now is because typically over thousands of years, we have said, if we are going to hire you and specifically tell you to go put yourselves in harm's way every single day and get yourself embroiled in legal situations that I would never find myself put in. I never have found myself. I've never brandished or I've never pulled a firearm on anybody. I've never had the opportunity. I've never had the reason to do that. If we're asking individuals to go down and do that on our behalf every single day, should they be held to a higher or lower legal standard? Because there's much more likely that they are going to enter into a scenario where something could go wrong and they're held accountable. Here's the rest of these questions, by the way. And here's what the last thing I'll say about that felony murder charge. I think Daniel hit it on the head here when he said a second ago. He said, I don't think they're intending to convict him. I think they're trying to diffuse the tensions. That's what I also see is kind of problematic right now.
Whoa. It's not kind of problematic. That should be the scariest thing you've ever heard in your life. That is not kind of problematic. The idea that someone could face the death penalty, and I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it or not deserve it. I don't know if he deserves it or not. This has nothing to do with that. But the idea that someone, it doesn't matter who they are, police or anybody, got arrested to ease tensions. That's scary, man. That's not justice. That's not a reason to arrest somebody. That's Wild Wild West. That's like the stuff of stories. That's not America. That's not modern times, right? That's not modern times. That's not the world we live in. That's the ones we talked about being past. We're supposed to be past. Well, we got to arrest somebody. I mean, I almost said something else. In other times, they'd say we have to blank somebody, right? Fill in the most horrifying thing you can think of there. That's what the state used to say. And I'm talking about like kings. That's what kings used to say to the captain of the guard. Oh, we're going to have to kill somebody or the mob's going to come in here and cut my head off, you know. That's scary to me. And I'm not saying that the mob is right or wrong or the police officer's right or wrong, but that's not technically, specifically justice. That's something else. It's not justice.
Well, and think about it this way too, Shine. Like, I think what Daniel's hitting on too is that they're not intending to convict him. They're intending to diffuse tensions. I think Daniel would understand also, like, it's only going to temporarily diffuse tensions, but in the long run, it's going to make it far, far worse because it's only going to reinforce. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just fearful that this is the outcome, that it's only going to reinforce the basic notion that we're stuck in now, that people do not have trust in their institutions. They don't have trust in the legal branch at all. Like if we're coming in Minneapolis with a third-degree murder charge and they're coming in Atlanta with a felony murder charge prior to us changing the way that those laws are applicable to police officers, it's highly unlikely that these officers will be convicted of this crime. There's the rub. That's the problem. What in the world happens then 2 months from now or a year from now or however long this takes when these people get off? Dude, I'll say this one more time. The guy that killed Trayvon Martin, I don't like to say his name because the dude that did it is just a
don't say his
bad
name.
guy. Outside of that situation, he's just a terrible dude. The guy that killed Trayvon Martin, he got off, and he's not even a law enforcement officer. He was just in a state that so happened to be a stand your ground state. So if that guy got off, how much more difficult do you think it's going to be to convict a police officer, y'all? That's my problem with it. Is a couple months from now or a couple years from now, whenever this stuff comes down, we're going to rehash this one more time because these people will not be held accountable for anything. Because at this point, we've tried to satiate desires and diffuse tensions in the short term, not looking for what's going to happen in the long term. If we wanted to do this properly, we possibly could have said, hey, we're going to pause on this for a second until we change the laws and figure out what society is doing right now. After we do that, maybe we'll figure out something to come back for these charges, or at least just that's going to go against the ex post facto thing I said a second ago. So maybe that wouldn't work. But at least we could come out there and make a statement about it. At least we could say, like, look, y'all, I don't know if we're going to be able to convict this guy of anything. Someone needs to say that and be totally honest about it right now. And this shouldn't be a hard thing for people to accept. People that are angling for change right now should be able to fully accept because they've seen it happen so many times in the past. They need to get people ready and prepared for, understand a couple months from now when this guy doesn't go anywhere. That's what we're trying to change. We need to use that as another example of motivating change. I don't know, bro, but it's certainly not going to dispel any, go ahead though, man. Sorry.
Well, what I'm saying is they charged him with like 12 things. So there are some things that could stick. Especially the violation of oaths that were
true.
Which were felonies, and they're not subjective.
They want to see a murder charge, though, right? They want to see a murder charge. They want to see a third degree. They want to see something legit that you and I would be held accountable with. That's what people are wanting. I just don't think they're going to get it.
And I'm not saying people are wrong. Something too, I just want to like throw out here to the Real News audience, just so like we don't seem heartless or like we don't have our fingers on the pulse, something like that. Watching the evidence presented by the prosecutor yesterday was disturbing to me.
Yeah, man.
It was disturbing. I would not want, obviously, that to be an encounter I had with the police. And I know it is an encounter that that people do have. It does happen. Probably every night, in some case, and maybe not all the way to death, but like where you're just sit there and hassled for almost an hour while they try to figure out a way to arrest you. I mean, that's pretty bad. And then all the other stuff that happened was bad. And so I'm disturbed by what happened that night. I'm disturbed by it, and I don't want it to happen again. So I just want to throw that out there, and I think it's important to say. I don't want people to be so disconnected from the idea of justice that they feel like it's safer to run from police when they're already right in front of them than it is to go to jail. It doesn't need to feel like a death sentence to go to jail. That is a problem. That's a perception problem that it doesn't matter whose fault it is. It's dangerous and we need to fix it. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. Providing fault for that particular problem that is dangerous for everybody. It's dangerous for everybody when a police officer has already got you right there. It's not like you're way off down the road. You're right there and you feel like it's safer to run than go to jail. We all have a problem. That's a problem for police. That's a problem for the person getting arrested. It's a problem for everybody in the immediate vicinity, and it's dangerous. And I'm not going to go ahead and blame anybody for that. It doesn't matter whose fault it is. We need a solution because it will cause disruption and danger in our society for various reasons. And we need to be solution oriented and not blame oriented when it comes to all this stuff. Because you start blaming, that's when people assign you to certain teams. And then you have enemies. So I want to be solution-oriented, and I want to point out that we're not cool necessarily, like with that. I don't want to say we're even not cool with it. It disturbed me. I was emotionally upset after watching all the evidence and all the things that happened with the police officer and Mr. Brooks. But we need to be solution-oriented. How do we make this not happen again? And that doesn't necessarily have to do with blame. It may have to do with rules, may have to deal with, but things that bothered me. I say all that to say something that the prosecutor was obviously moving outside of where he felt comfortable. He knew that he needed to do a 45-minute press conference and show pictures and show video. He knew there would be outrage, but he was calling for in there, something that, Grant, I don't know if you noticed, and I haven't seen anybody report. He was like, you know what's really holding me up? Grand juries. I should be able to indict without grand juries.
Wow, man. Okay.
That's what this prosecutor was saying. And to me, it's like, I'm not blaming him. He even wanted to point out, too, this was like the 11th or 12th police shooting he was trying to prosecute since he became prosecutor. He was definitely playing to the crowd a lot. And basically saying, I'm willing to do whatever I can and maybe even whatever I can't in order to get this done for you. So vote for me. And I don't know. I'm not trying to like make it feel bad. Like it's all political. So that means what he was saying didn't come from a real place. I'm sure it did. I don't want to judge him that way. But there were things about that were just peppered in there that I say, so what comes next? If a prosecutor today, based on pressure to ease tensions, is saying things like, you know, it'd be a lot easier if I didn't have a grand jury. That scares me a little bit. What does the next prosecutor say when he's under pressure? Like Grant said, because this doesn't solve a long-term problem. This is a short-term solution that will have long-term consequences, right? Because you'll end up promising people things and it won't get delivered. I mean, they're already saying that the police officer that killed Mr. Floyd, or apparently killed Mr. Floyd, has a great defense, and he might get off because they overcharged him. And obviously that will cause problems in the future. You know, so we need to be solution-oriented, not blame-oriented, because it will. It may feel good to get revenge and be blame-oriented. It may feel good, but it will cause way darker stuff to happen in the future. So that's how, I don't know. I know I just kind of took over there for a second, Grant, but I just wanted to talk about my emotions. I wanted to acknowledge that the stuff we heard about Mr. Brooks is disturbing. We're not defending anybody. We're trying to talk about solutions. And we don't know what they are. We're just regular people like you. We're not police, and we're not prosecutors, we're not defense attorneys, kind of grieving. That's what we're doing. We're processing this, we're grieving, and we're also trying to figure out what the solutions are. And we don't know either.
Exactly. Man, I think that's so great. The solution-oriented conversation. That's where everybody needs to be right now. Daniel actually said in Facebook, unfortunately, the reality is that he's probably, meaning the officer, the unfortunate reality is that he's probably not going to get convicted, and the prosecutor knows that too. Daniel also said, though, but the risk of future riot is less pressing than the risk of current rioting. I think that's a very interesting way to look at it, man. I mean, it really is. It's basically just like, look, we got to do what we got to do right now. It's going to be extremely difficult to charge these officers with pretty much anything, but we at least need to make some type of signaling as to what people would desire, what they would like to see, how things should go, or something like that, or at least for nothing else, just quell some of the potential for the current situation. Because if they come out there, the story that a lot of people don't know as well, as it pertains to the George Floyd situation, that officer initially had a plea deal worked out. Like within the first 72 hours, he had a plea deal worked out. And that was a breaking story that just like lost traction outside of the regional affiliates, more than an hour after it took place. Nobody picked up on it. There was a plea deal that was already worked out, and then something fell through the cracks. They didn't say what. Something fell through the cracks, and the plea deal was squandered. That would have been a very interesting situation. The plea deal came out and said he pled to, I don't know, some, minor little charge or something. Here's what I want to end with, though, and maybe we'll pick up at this point tomorrow. And this is what the whole thing I've been leading to is, in that situation that was going on with Mr. Brooks, I would really like to know from the Real News audience. Either think about this tonight, throw it in the comment section as we're ending the show, whatever you need to do, message us later on. First of all, I want to know, do you think the charge was the correct one? Secondly, here's the second situation. Let's say that Mr. Brooks did not take the taser, but he actually ended up stealing the gun from the police officer, as opposed to the taser. If Mr. Brooks was pointing a real gun as opposed to a taser at the officer, would that killing have been justified then? In a civilian on civilian situation, it depends on which state you're in, but that's where it gets a little bit more context. I'm asking these questions because I'm trying to figure out what the line is for most of the people that listen to this show. The other question here, should we expect our law enforcement to make those kinds of decisions in live time? Those kinds of decisions, meaning when you're in the midst of something like that go down, did he take my real gun? Did he take my taser? What's being pointed at me? I know something's being pointed at me. Should we expect law enforcement officers, as Eric said, to be held to a higher standard to make that split-second decision? Next question here is, would lethal force have been warranted if Mr. Brooks had attempted to steal a car, to use a taser on a civilian, or to harm civilians in any other way? I'm asking these particular questions for a very specific reason, because these particular questions are usually what the legislation is designed to tackle, or designed to make allowance for, or designed to work around. Would lethal force have been warranted if Mr. Brooks had attempted to steal a car, use the taser on a civilian, or harm a civilian in some other way? Should lethal force always be out of the question when someone is stopped for a simple DUI? Should that be a standard? If someone's pulled over for something very, very small, if you initially pulled them over for a DUI, should it be off the table entirely from that point going forward? The last question I have here is, let's say that we're in that exact same situation. So the officers just have, if we do say that lethal force or any type of aggressive force should be off the table for a DUI, should the officers just let Mr. Brooks run free when he attempted to escape and evade? Now, I know that sounds like like I'm being belittling when I ask the question. It's not the best word, but I'm not trying to. I genuinely want to know. There's been a lot of situations say like it's not going to have nothing really going to harm after that. It's better than having a dead person if he just runs off and escapes. I mean, he apparently had a warrant. That's why he was running. So the reason why he was running is he's not getting arrested because he's afraid of police officers and going back to jail. I mean, shoot, man, they're going to pick him up later on at some family member's house. That's basically what you've been seeing in the comment section. So I want to know where people stand on that as well. The comment section of YouTube clips or something else like that, they basically said, let him run away, pick him up at a family member's house later on. What's the harm in that? It's a genuine question for a lot of people. Anyways, let me know. You were going to say something, Shine? Or?
Man, these hypotheticals are worrying me too, because it's not realistic. It's not realistic. Like, no cop is like going to sit down and, as someone's walking away, and go to a friend and go to the next officer over and say, "Do you think he's dangerous? Do you think we should chase him?" There's no time for that. There's no time. Right. Like, there's no time for that. I mean, and golly, and everything you're doing is on camera. So if anything you do questions what you're about to do, that's evidence that can be used against you that you were doing the wrong thing. So they never in person do they question what another officer's doing. And the other thing is the Supreme Court precedent that if an officer feels, not knows, feels that the person could be a danger to them or anyone else, it's okay for them to discharge their weapon. Like, that's weird. I mean, I'm not saying those things are right or wrong. What I'm saying is, like, we have to go. We may have to spend a decade working on this, Grant. There's so many applicable laws and precedent, and there isn't going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. We may have to try things and trust, and you know what I'm saying? We may have to, like, take risk and try things and whatever, and take things out and then look at data 5 years later and see what's going on here. But I think it deserves that kind of attention.
Well, honestly, man, like some have actually made, and by some I mean actual qualified scholars. I mean, you know, legit Ivy League folks have made the argument that we should basically just take the general rules of warfare engagement. It's not what you're supposed to call it. There's an actual term for what I'm talking about. I apologize for not understanding. But basically, the laws and rules and regulations that are military officers or military members are held to in warfare, rules of engagement, if you will, and just apply that on top of police officers, right? Geneva Convention and the whole deal. A lot of scholars have basically said, like, well, you know, if you're in warfare, man, and you kill someone that's unarmed or a child or whatever else, I mean, it's a major problem in Vietnam when kids would walk up to him with a basket full of grenades and you couldn't do anything about it because it's a kid. What are you going to do, right? So some people said, like, over the years, man, to some weird extent, maybe the military actually is far more stringent. Our military is far more stringent than even our police officers are. Maybe we need to take an entirely different look on that. There's been people that have been trying to address this, but you're right, bro. Like,
that makes sense from stakeholder point of view. Every country has a stake in and a responsibility to make sure that war is done in a way that isn't like whatever. But what countries do with their police is their own business, and it doesn't affect anybody else. So an international body governing police sounds stupid to me. Because there's way more people out there that have way lower standards of morality than we do, and they don't deserve to be at the table with us. That's stupid. Like, do we want Iran and Libya and China, like, being on a board about, like, police brutality, international rules for police brutality? No, we don't. That's a stupid idea. That's a stupid idea. Now, I do like the idea of universal cultural norms and saying, like, we agree that certain things are right and wrong and stuff like that, but nothing enforceable. Like, golly, that's weird. Like, the Geneva Convention makes all the sense in the world to me because everybody has a stake in that.
Well, and China,
but there's a lot of misplaced. There's a lot of ways that could be taken advantage of. One country could make another country's police force crap, and then they could, like, set up terror cells in them You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And disrupt the country. There's a lot of weird incentives in there that I don't trust people to have that kind of authority internationally. I just don't. But like what I think is we're gonna have to like use the 50-state laboratory, try things, look at data, adjust, and I don't know, believe, have faith, and that our system of government and the way we do things can figure this out if it stays a priority. You know what I'm saying? I have faith in our system. Forget an international system. I don't have any faith in any international system. World Health Organization, Federal Trade Committee, or the World Trade Organization, NAFTA, GATT, any UN, any international, NATO, even when we're the main ones, these international organizations suck at what they do. I mean, so I don't want them making. I don't want them making rules for anything, let alone our policing. I think the American system, with its 50 states and 18,000 police departments, 18,000 police departments, can try different things in different communities, share data, figure out what works. The public and the institutions being committed to equitable outcomes. You know, I think we got to believe in that. We got to lean on our system. That's what we got to do, man. Because it can fix it.
Eric said in Facebook a second ago, we could apply the rules and not have the world look at it, or maybe choose the ones that do. And one opposing voice, I don't know. I think you're right, Sean. This would take a while to sort out. Daniel said somehow the English have managed to have unarmed beat cops, and they've got actual terrorists living among them. Yeah, I mean, that's the other alternative here is look at the UK model. I mean, their officers they are not armed, and when a situation goes down, that's why it takes such a long time to quell situations over there, is because it's it is what it is, right? Now,
I saw a video of 150 police running from a mob over the weekend in London.
Well, and this is what I'm saying, Sean. Importantly, we need to keep things all in perspective here, too, because the murder rate in London is actually higher than it is in New York City. And that is in spite of the fact that officers do not have firearms. And that is also in spite of the fact that it is nearly impossible to obtain a firearm as an individual in London. That is a very true statistic. Go look it up if you don't believe me. The murder rate in London, primarily because of knife attacks, but the murder rate in London is actually higher than it is in New York City. Per capita, the whole deal, break it down as you would like to. So it puts a very interesting sort of bookend on this whole conversation today, because I'm kind of coming to the point now where, Sean, does any of this conversation even matter? I mean, let me ask that. Maybe we should have cleared that to begin with, because the calls for defunding police officers right now, not New York City, but San Francisco and Minneapolis have already done this. There are going to be, at least in those cities, less law enforcement officers in their traditional sense on the street than there were before. Now, I say in the traditional sense because what the proposed model is going to be that if you have a domestic abuse situation going on, you don't have a law enforcement officer in the traditional sense show up. You have a social worker show up. If there's a suicide claim, you don't have a law enforcement officer show up. You have someone else that's trained to do that. If there's a wellness check for someone, you don't have someone else showing up. No-knock warrants are not going to no longer be a thing. Law enforcement, as it traditionally is concerned, will not be nearly as prevalent as it has been in the past. That means that for at least some of those situations, because there are less law enforcement officers out there, the burden of that responsibility is going to fall on you and I, us, the people, the citizens. And that's why I asked the question, does any of this conversation even matter, buddy? Because if that's the case, if it's about me enacting harm on another individual to protect my life or property, as opposed to a law enforcement officer, well, now it doesn't matter if it's me, because I'm a citizen, I'm a civilian. The law is very clear on that. Nobody is talking about changing the way that the law is applicable to me. I think that's what people are overlooking here, is as we have less law enforcement, that burden is going to fall back on me and my Second Amendment right to do something about that. There I have to be very, very clear about what standard I'm held to. And as those occurrences start to take up, I'm going to wonder, is there going to be a separate conversation about, well, maybe we should change the law as it pertains to civilians about protecting our property or protecting my life or protecting something else or enacting harm upon another individual or harming another individual to get my property back or anything else that we would ask a law enforcement officer to do as there is less and less law enforcement in the street. Does that make sense, Sean? Does that fall on? I mean, that's what I'm wondering is, does this conversation even matter? Because the defund police conversation is so prevalent right now. The real question we should be asking is, like, are we ready to take that burden on, right?
Well, so that you asked a bunch of questions there. I'll answer the first one. Does this conversation matter? Yeah, of course it does. Because when I was saying earlier, what we're really doing is what we're actually doing. Is this a committee to solve police problems? Us and the people on Mixer, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, and Real News Radio Live? No. That's not what we're doing. We're discussing current problems and our reactions to them. We're grieving about a situation that we didn't like. That doesn't mean we're blaming anybody necessarily, because we don't know, because who are we? We don't live in Atlanta. We weren't there, but we're grieving that a tragic situation happened. That's what we're doing. We're group grieving about a tragic situation that happened in our society, and we're throwing in our 2 cents of our feedback based on that. And does it matter in a practical sense? No, because even though I was saying it matters, yes, in the like communal cultural sense, like because grieving and doing that with friends matters. But in a practical sense, no, it doesn't matter, because when I was saying we need to lean on our system, like that's an option. We don't have another one besides throw away the system. There will be a couple municipalities that are going to be laboratories of new trying things. They're going to try them. We're all going to look at data. And if they have good data, then municipalities that are in similar situations that look either demographically or politically or even geographically similar might try some of the things that they think can work for them. Other people may look at the data and say, man, I didn't like that. And they may try something completely different based on the data. So that is what's going to happen, regardless if that's what we want to happen or not. That is what's going to happen. Even if there was a massive federal response, even if the Congress made rules or whatever, there would be an inverted situation where some people wouldn't follow them, and there would be an experiment happening. That's the case. I mean, so I was saying it like it was an option. It's our only option besides forget the system, which is something that people are calling for. Some people are calling for forget the system, but all that does is change the system. It's not going to get rid of it. It's going to change it, because that's how things work in America. You never get what you want. You end up affecting the Overton window. That's what you do. And that's what has happened. So now there's things that will be tried that seem okay to try that were not okay to try. That's what Overton window stuff means. The window of what is acceptable has moved, and people are going to try having these social workers work with police, or in some cases have no police. And we'll see how that works. I think it's an as corruptible system as the current police system, personally. Like, just because they don't have guns doesn't mean they can't be weird. They can't be authoritarian. And with the emphasis on mental health, I really feel like we could be entering what we were in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, where people get arrested for wrongthink. But we'll just have to see how it turns out. It may be great. It may be fine. It may be terrible. But people are going to try things, and I think that's America. That's America, is people are going to try stuff. We'll see how it works out.
That's a fantastic way to put that, man. And it's probably the best way to end the show here, too. We're about 30 minutes over, man. I appreciate y'all sticking with us. And honestly, I appreciate the Real News family for not doing the extra half hour with us, but also just sort of, I don't know, going with us for a little while on that long of a conversation. Because, again, we don't do this on behalf of any organization. Sean and I do work for one organization called Americans for Prosperity, and that this criminal justice reform bucket has been something that Sean and I have devoted a large portion of our adult lives to before coming to this company, but certainly over the last year, as Sean and I have been here working for this company, we've devoted a sizable portion, the overwhelming majority of the work that we do on a day-to-day basis to get paid for is operating in this world, operating in this space, making sure that we're trying to do things that, strengthen families, solve generational problems, restore victims back to where they were before, and in general, man, just try and do something a little bit better than what we've done in the past. Yeah. That's why we're so passionate about it. That's why, again, shout out to you guys for helping get the smart on crime, drug-free zone bills passed in here in Tennessee. It's a great thing there. By the way, my name is Mr. Henry David Sean Thompson over there, signing off on a long one here for today's Shining Off. That's what I'm going to do, man. Shining off for both of us. We'll see you tomorrow.
Starting this Friday on Real News Radio, we expand our programming to include a new show, The Veteran Next Door. Quality edutainment like you've never heard it before. Stories of real veterans, told by the veterans themselves, and hosted by Knoxville resident Randy Baxter. Tune in this Friday at 12 p.m. for The Veteran Next Door on Real News Radio, broadcasting from realnewsradio.live.